move on to classifying the sources. So the reference classification sheet is automatically generated when you import a library from EndNote. And you can see that here. So the reference classification there is a book, the author, the year, the title, etc. Some might be unassigned because that information isn't there in the EndNote. And we'll have a look at the full list of fields contained within that reference classification before long. Okay, so this is done automatically. Okay, so what we see here is another format for looking at the classification. So we're looking at reference classification, and you can see then a number of fields, or what in NVivo we would term attributes. So the reference type, if that's a book, or if it's a journal article, for instance, or other kind of documents. There are many different attributes here. If you don't want all of them, it's fine. You can delete, or you can just live with them. Some might remain unpopulated, entirely your choice. The main thing though is when you end up adding manually, as you're very likely to do for at least a few of your sources, literature sources, is that you use the same reference classifications. You just assign that document to be a reference. If you end up making alternative file classifications for your manually imported literature, it can cause problems later when you start to do searches. So definitely recommend that you use the one that is created from the literature when you've imported that manually, if you choose to do it that way. Okay, so classifying sources, if you've used EndNote, would be very easy, and it's just a case of having a look to see, well, what has NVivo done? Where are the classifications found? How do I look at them, etc. That becomes very easy. So we now move on to code and annotate. And remember now, what you're doing is to code and annotate your data, and your data in this case in a literature review are your journal articles or other literature sources. So we've created a number of nodes, made a number of nodes, and I thought carefully about what kind of nodes would be useful for literature review. So we've got aims and focus. So this is where you would take the text that relates to in the paper to the description of the aims and focus of that paper. And then research methods were broken down into a number of findings or contribution to literature in relation to methods, epistemology, methodology, research questions. So under research questions, for instance, where the paper states their research questions, you would just code that as research questions. Where they mention their sample size, the sample size of that paper, not talking about some other paper, the paper that you're reviewing, then you'd put that under that text under sample size, so long with, say, any justifications for that sample size. Any attrition, for instance, could go under that section. But we also then are looking at research gap or research recommendations. So if the paper talks about, they identify at the end of their paper a research gap, then you can put that text there, or any implications and research recommendations arising from that particular study. Themes, that's where you'd need to do a bit more work. So we'd expect that if you're conducting either a content or thematic analysis of your literature, probably a thematic analysis, you'd end up coming up with a number of themes, and therefore your probably want to then make some sub-themes as well, and that's up to you. So you just right click and make a new node or sub-node that comes off themes. And you might want to change that so that you're giving the theme the name that relates to your literature review. But we've given you a basic template from which you can start.